Stories are powerful. They are perhaps the most powerful thing that any culture might possess. The stories that we tell about who wins and who loses, who gets honor and glory and who doesn't, and more importantly, the way in which you can earn that honor and glory are very, very important. Stories help to define our values and explain our experiences. And in our culture today, one of the primary vehicles for telling those stories happens through movies. Movies help us to experience the world in new ways, and sometimes they inspire us to encounter the world in new ways, and they change us and inspire us to become new people. Movies might make you want to become a lawyer like Atticus Finch, who is played by Gregory Peck in To Kill a Mockingbird. Perhaps they make you want to inspire students like Mr. Keating did as he was played by Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society. Movies make us want to be better people. They inspire us to be better than we are. And today's story of Wreck-It Ralph is certainly about someone who wants to be better than he is. We're also going to look at the story of the Apostle Paul and the churches of Galatia, and all of them struggled with wanting to be better than the way they started. And so the central question that then we will explore today is, how does a bad guy become a good guy? Right? How do you get from being a bad guy to being a good guy? This is a question that becomes important for all of us, regardless of whether we've seen this movie or not. So I want to start with the story of Wreck-It Ralph, and if you've not seen it, or even if you have, I want to remind us of the context that we find ourselves in. So Ralph is the villain in a video game called Fix-It Felix Jr. This is an early 80s sort of arcade-style game, and Ralph has the job of smashing the building. And he says, "I'm the best wrecker that I know." But he doesn't get any credit for it at all. He's very sad about this. Fix-It Felix is the hero of the game, and he has a golden hammer, and he fixes the building. Now, the movie begins with Ralph attending a Bad Anon meeting. So Bad Anon is an anonymous group therapy kind of group, and all of the villains of all the arcade games gather at this group, and they talk about how hard it is to be a bad guy, how it's lonely and difficult. And Ralph says in the middle of this meeting, "I might not want to be a bad guy anymore." The other villains are horrified. Why would you not want to be a villain? That's his job. I'm bad, and that's good, they say. But Ralph doesn't want to be bad anymore. He's feeling this deep longing for something beyond his current life. He wants recognition. He wants to be someone else. He wants to be loved, to stay on top of the building instead of getting thrown off at the end of every game. He wants a medal. Ralph is sure that this one thing would help him to be loved by everyone. If he could just get a medal, then there'd be fireworks and celebration, and people would love him. And so Ralph goes outside of his game, which is like a horrifying thing to the rest of the video game players. And Ralph takes this shortcut to getting a medal. And his shortcut, as shortcuts often do, leads to lots of chaos and disaster all over the arcade. In the middle of all of this chaos, he makes a friend named Vanellope. Vanellope doesn't see him as a bad guy. Vanellope sees him as her hero. And Ralph helps Vanellope to achieve her goal of becoming a racer. So they build this race car, and they learn to race, and things are going really well, and they're right on track, both of them, to the path of being good guys, when Ralph has this long conversation with the head of Vanellope's world, King Candy. And King Candy says to Ralph, for your own good, you need to go back to your own game. Here's a medal. Go take it and go back to your own game. Leave Vanellope alone. And so Ralph does. He finally has a medal. Life should be good. He's achieved everything that he has been striving for. But somehow it doesn't work out quite the way he wants it to. Let's watch a clip and see how it is when he comes back home.
Gene, where is everybody?
They're gone. After Felix went to find you and then didn't come back, everyone panicked and abandoned ship.
But I'm here now.
It's too late, Ralph. Litwak's pulling our plug in the morning. But never let it be said that I'm not a man of my word. The place is yours, Ralph. Enjoy.
Gene, wait. Listen, this is not what I wanted.
Well, what did you want, Ralph?
I don't know. I was just tired of living alone in the garbage.
Well, now you can live alone in the penthouse.
All right, so if you've seen the movie, you know that that's a big reveal right there, that Vanellope is more than she seems to be. But what I wanted us to see is two things from that clip. One, that Ralph living in the penthouse, him achieving all of his goals. He had a shiny medal. He had the whole penthouse to himself. None of that brought him happiness because he was still alone. And so he takes the shiny medal and he throws it away and he pulls out this heart-shaped medal. And so if you haven't seen it, what that heart-shaped medal is a medal that his friend Vanellope gave him, and it says, "You're my hero." So what we see here is that he chooses, instead of great fame and success, he chooses friendship. And this then becomes one of the most important lessons in this movie, that friendship is the medal that counts. Ralph goes back to that game, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to protect and save his friend. He sacrifices all he is, all he has, so that he can maintain and have that friendship with Vanellope flourish. So that's Wreck-It Ralph. The second story, though, that I want to tell you is that of the Apostle Paul. Our reading today came from the letter that Paul wrote to the churches in Galatia. This is Paul's angry letter. Paul lets out all of his former bad guy passion to let the people know that they are really, really messing up. And he, in chapter 3, builds to a boiling point and he says, "You foolish Galatians." He's really not happy in this letter because the Galatians have been turning away from the teachings that Paul gave them and following that of the Judaizers. So the Judaizers were saying, you can't be saved by grace alone. You need to do stuff that's really hard in order to have God love you. That if you work really hard and you follow all of the old rules that, by the way, none of us have ever been able to keep, you will be loved by God. And so you need to really work hard at it, and maybe God might love you. And forget all that stuff that Paul told you about being saved by grace. So Paul is angry. He's angry that they've been listening to the Judaizers. And he is fighting back. And the question that he really wants to clear up for them is that he's not a bad guy, right? That they are listening to the Judaizers because they think the Judaizers are good guys and maybe Paul is a bad guy. So Paul then begins to tell them the story of his own faith journey. So here it is. Paul was raised in Tarsus. Tarsus is a wealthy, prosperous city not far from Galatia. And his parents had, probably because they were very wealthy, had become Roman citizens. And so Paul is born into Roman citizenship. So he has status as a Roman citizen. He has wealth. And his parents, and he and his parents help him to get on this track for great religious success. He's smart and he's faithful and he trains really, really hard to be the very best of all the Jewish leaders. He wants that I'm a good Jewish boy medal. And he trains with the Ivy League of rabbi teachers, the Rabbi Gamaliel. And Paul has all of the marks of a rising star. He, I'm sure, believed that he was going to be the best good guy that had ever been. But then he had an encounter with Jesus, and his life changed. God helped to reorient him, and instead of fighting the Christians, he became their biggest champion. He had worked hard then throughout the rest of his life to reach out to Gentiles like the Galatians and help them discover the grace and the love of Jesus Christ. Paul says, I advanced in Judaism beyond many among my people of the same age. I was far more zealous for the traditions of my ancestors. Do you see? Far more zealous. He wanted those medals, all of them. A medal for being really good with traditions. Maybe he even wanted a medal for wrecking churches. Just like Ralph wrecked all of the buildings, Paul was really good at wrecking things, right? Wrecking all of the Christians and the churches. But a medal this isn't the way that you win medals, not by wrecking things. You see, Jesus doesn't care how impressive your credentials are. Jesus isn't impressed with how powerful your rise to the top was. In order to get the real medal, Paul had to be willing to give up his former life. He had to throw away the shiny, I can be good at stuff medal, and instead take on the medal of humility, the medal of friendship, the medal of following Christ. He had to make new friends like Ananias and Barnabas. He had to be willing to sacrifice everything in order to know Jesus fully. And Paul did all of that and more. And today we remember him not for wrecking churches, but for building them. So here's the question for all of us. Ultimately, Ralph's story isn't really all that important to our faith journey, and maybe even the Apostle Paul's story of his faith journey isn't all that important to your life today. But the question that we all have to answer is, have you ever felt like a bad guy? Have you ever felt excluded and as though you were an outcast? Have you ever looked back at the course of your life and thought, I'm a whole lot better at wrecking things than I am at building them? I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you probably have felt like that at some point. I'm fairly confident that every person in this room has failed at something. I certainly have. That you felt like an outcast at least once, and probably more than that. You might look at those sitting next to you and think, well, I might be like that, but certainly not that person. But that's not true either, right? That we all have made a few mistakes along the way, and we all have a reason at some point in our lives to have felt like a bad guy. And so then the pivotal question becomes, how do I become a good guy? How do I change from being a bad guy to a good guy? How can I know that I'm accepted and loved? So first, I'm going to remind you that it's not by doing lots of good stuff. You don't have to be smart or wealthy like the Apostle Paul in his early life. Those sorts of medals don't help you to develop good friends. Ambition, if it is not constantly checked by God, can turn you into a person that you don't want to be. The people of Galatia thought that Paul's message was just too simple. They thought, surely we have to do something difficult for God to love us. We have to go back to all those old traditions. The Judaizers must have seemed smart or eloquent. They must have seemed right, and Paul seemed wrong. But we know that ambition and impressive deeds don't bring us joy or freedom. We know the broken power of ambition. Whether it's making money or chasing popularity or desperately trying to find acceptance, those voices call us away from God, and they lead to a life of emptiness. We need to remember that wealth and power and popularity, none of them will bring us to the joy of knowing Jesus and being known by Jesus. Second, we need to know that we need the help of good friends. If you want to move from being a bad guy to a good guy, you've got to have good friends. Ralph had Vanellope. Paul had Ananias and Barnabas. Just think what would have happened if Ananias hadn't been willing to go and put his hands on Paul's eyes, or if Barnabas hadn't been willing to take a risk and go on a mission trip with Paul. We need good friends, and we need to be good friends like those people. We need the help of our fellow Christians. We need the church to encourage us and strengthen us and help us try new things. We need others to remind us that perhaps we were bad guys at one point in our lives, but that Jesus has called us and claimed us, and we don't have to be bad anymore. Finally, we can rest in understanding of what Paul was trying to tell the Galatians. Galatians 5:6 says this: "Neither circumcision nor uncircumcision count for anything." Or to put it in another way, neither life with a medal or life without a medal count for anything. The only thing that counts is faith working through love. The only thing that counts is faith working through love. So then we are called to develop our faith, to spend time in prayer and scripture, allowing God to remind us over and over of his love. Trust in your baptism. If you have been baptized, then you have been claimed by God, and you matter. And if you still feel it, or if you've never been baptized, or if you've never prayed to have God claim you, then take time praying about that. Come to Pastor Don or myself. Let us help you on that journey. Go to a trusted friend or spiritual leader. Let us remember that Jesus came to us. Jesus loved us. Jesus called us friends. He died on our behalf and now invites us to become heirs of God. We are no longer bad, but we are redeemed in Christ. We receive love from Christ and we give love of Christ. Let us realize that Jesus has given us all the acceptance and the joy for which we've been longing. And I pray this prayer that God would renew your spirit so that even if your day ends by getting thrown off a building, you'll still know that you are valued and accepted and loved by Jesus and loved by all of us. Amen.